Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. In this episode, we're going to hear some extraordinary revelations about the people that were in the cottage the night that Carr Cox died. I found a crucial clue to this here in this autobiography of a widely respected British modernist artist called Pip Benveniste, in the company of a very comforting Islay malt whisky. I've just been transported back to the beginning of the Second World War, where Pip, Walker as she was then, is a little more than 18. She's working in a pacifist farming community in Cornwall, where she ends up being hired by a local farmer, a Mr. Vaughan, to help look after his son. They fall in love and begin to live together. In this chapter, she describes how she remembers reading the newspaper reports about the death of Carr Cox at the cottage near Zena. And then she goes on to describe how, early in her new relationship with Mr. Vaughan, he tells her that on the night Carr Cox died, he was actually there in the cottage. And what's more, that he knows exactly what happened. And there are more revelations to come about Aleister Crowley and his life in Cornwall. This will raise some important questions for Graham and for me. Can we get to some sort of truth, some version based on facts? Or really, is this just a beauty contest for the best story?
This is episode 5 of One Dark Night.
Hiya.
Graham, finally. Where are you?
Well, I'm just having a walk, actually. It's a bit rainy, but it's nice. Just getting out, clearing my head a bit.
I listened to the interview. Difficult to know what to say, really. I felt, in some ways, I was kind of eavesdropping, but at the same time, I felt as though I'd been invited to experience it, and I suppose that's what made it so emotional.
I didn't listen to it back. I think it was kind of harrowing enough first time around, to be honest, but I'm so glad we did it. I mean, it's been decades, and we should have had that conversation a long time ago, but hey, we've had the conversation now, and that's absolutely amazing.
So you're glad you did it?
Personally, yeah, really glad, and I think Mum's glad too. You know, she's been carrying a lot of stuff around, and we all know that. Just airing it, I don't know what will happen, but I hope it's sort of the start of perhaps being able to talk about things and think about things a little bit more differently. Maybe process things, as people would say these days. I said to Mum, I didn't think I wanted us to use this for the podcast. And I thought she would say the same thing. But she said something I hadn't really thought about, which was that nowadays, if people lose a child, it's talked about. Often counselling is available for people, or they seek that out. There are ways of at least expressing the emotion and bringing that emotion into people's daily lives, and hopefully finding a way of moving forward openly and together. Back in the day when Mum lost Paul, it was seen to be brave to hold your emotion in, to not cry at the funeral, to just button up and get on with it. And I think that has consequences. That has consequences too. And when we spoke about this after doing it, she said she felt that the interview had a purpose beyond just us talking about things, which is that it publicises how important it is to talk about these things and to get them out in the open and to seek help. Because I think she spent 60 years trying to deal with this pretty much alone, and she regrets it. She regrets that, and she regrets not having the opportunity, or to have lived in a culture and a time when the opposite was the case. So she wants us to use it. And I think it's more than that. It's part of... It's central to the story that we're discovering as we go through this podcast, that people's interest in the occult and clairvoyance and hauntings and all of those things. Yes, it's an interest in life and the afterlife, but it's more than that too. It is a part of the way we process grief and loss. And we're discovering that, I think, in the story that we're telling, that's unfolding for us here, how different stories of grief and loss have become kind of, some ways warped and become a kind of mythology here in a larger landscape. But there is at the heart of this a true private story of terrible loss and grief. That in some ways is as powerful, if not more powerful, than the myth it's contributed to. Yeah, no, I'm on my way over to you now, walking. Should have driven really because it's raining, but I'm on my way.
You must be soaked.
Yeah, dripping boy, yeah. Cross Andy dry drizzle, soaking right through.
Listen, I found someone that I think you need to talk to.
Me, I need to talk to somebody. Okay, cool.
About the young couple that were in the cottage that night, the Vaughns.
Right, okay. But I thought we pretty much discovered all there was to know about them. You know, that he went mad, she killed herself, and very sad. But so what else?
Well, to give you a for instance, what if I were to tell you that night in the cottage, their baby son was there?
Oh, wow.
So the version that Paul Newman tells is that the Vaughns were followers of Aleister Crowley, and that they performed various sorts of rituals in their cottage, maybe with other people. He says they took drugs. He really paints a very unpleasant picture of this couple engaging in all manner of satanic rituals, drug taking, nefarious activities, which is completely false. And that's just got no basis in fact.
Anthony Diller is an author and academic, and while he was researching the so-called angry young men of the 1950s, he came across the author Paul Newman and went on to read the same book that we found, The Tregurthan Horror. The thing was that for him there was something missing. Why was there such a lack of information about the young couple, the Vaughns? This was strange, since they were central to why Carl Cox went to the cottage and played a key role in the events that followed. So he decided to do his own research, including contacting members of the Vaughan family. We've set up a video call with Anthony, and he's about to give us an account of that night we've never heard before.
On the night in question, they asked Carl Cox to dinner in the cottage, and Paul Newman says there was some sort of ritual that they all participated in, and this ritual went wrong, and the result was that Carl died. Mr. Vaughan, he calls him John Vaughan. John Vaughan went mad, and his wife disappeared from history. One thing that really puzzled me, I wondered, why did he say so little about the Vaughans? And as I researched the Vaughans, I found that the real people were very different from his portrayal of them. I mean, he even calls the man John Vaughan when his real name is Gerald Vaughan. Gerald, a fascinating person. He came from this incredibly privileged background. His father was the manager of Gerald Maurier's theatre company. So, as I understand it, he was involved in all the financial aspects of that theatre. So very wealthy man, went to Cambridge University in the 1930s to study philosophy, which at that time was called moral sciences. And then after Cambridge, Gerald, for a year, tried to become a sculptor, but that came to nothing. He actually met Ellaline when they were in Cambridge. He was a student there as well. I'm not certain of that, but that's what I think. And while he was at Cambridge, he became obsessed with D.H. Lawrence. He became his great hero. And so that's why he moved to Cornwall. They were living in their cottage definitely in January 1937. And that's where they got married.
So when Gerald and Aleister moved into the cottage, Aleister was already pregnant at that point, or became pregnant then?
In the summer of 1937, they were travelling around Ireland, so I assume she got pregnant then.
Patrick was born in the cottage itself?
Yes, that's right. He was born in the cottage. And so at the time of Carr Cox's death, Patrick was about 5 or 6 months old. And Paul Newman doesn't mention him at all in his book.
So the story that's current, I think, and that seems to be most believed, is that Carr Cox was suspicious of the goings-on up at the cottage and was very concerned about an unspecified young woman who was very vulnerable, she felt, who lived at the cottage, which perhaps may have been Gerald's wife.
Yeah.
And that she went up to the cottage on that night of the 22nd of May, 1938, to investigate and to kind of come to the rescue of this vulnerable young woman, whereupon she stumbled on some satanic goings-on, which resulted in her terrible death. And as you say before, Gerald Vaughan's madness as a result of it.
Around this time, Ellaline was beginning to show signs of mental illness, and she was having hallucinations. And as I see it, around that time, because Gerald and Ellaline were incomers, the locals were trying to drive them away, a bit like the locals were trying to drive away D.H. Lawrence, many years earlier. So in the case of Gerald and his wife, they were like making strange noises at night outside the cottage. They were moving stones around the cottage to make them feel uncomfortable. Now, because Ellaline was beginning to have some sort of mental problems, Gerald wasn't sure if what she was telling him was what she was hallucinating or what was really happening. And so, as I understand it, he invited Carr Cox up to the cottage to help him decide what was really happening and what was Ellaline's hallucination. And it just happened that Carr had a bad heart, and on the night she went for a meal in the cottage, she fell asleep after the meal and died in her sleep. But there was no hint of anything magical or satanic that as far as I know.
Is there anything that you've been able to discover about Ellaline?
Yeah, she was beginning to show signs of mental problems around the time Patrick was born, and in the early part of 1938. And there came a time when Gerald was unable to look after her at home, and very reluctantly she went to some sort of mental institution in Yorkshire, and then he managed to bring her back to St. Lawrence's in Bodmin, or a mental institution in Cornwall.
Yeah.
But he still stayed in touch, and wrote to her regularly, kept in contact, visited her, and then Gerald started farming. He needed somebody to look after Patrick, his young son. Pip Walker was a young girl who offered to look after his young son. After a while, they became a couple and had three more children. All of the children became very successful. Patrick is still alive. He's about 80. is a professor of medicine or was a professor of medicine at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Another interesting fact about Patrick is he was married twice. His second wife had a daughter who married Gordon Brown. So, and Patrick Vaughan was one of the only 20 guests at the marriage of Gordon Brown and Sarah. They wanted to keep it small, yeah.
6 degrees of separation.
That's right, yes, yeah. Patrick's sons, yeah, they've all been very successful, yes. But then I did receive an email from Mark Vaughan saying that Patrick is sick of this whole Carr Cox story.
I bet he is.
And just wants to forget about it.
Yeah.
Which I find a bit strange because it's libeling his father, you know.
It is, yeah.
Painting his father as a Satanist, a drug taker, possibly a murderer. And so I'm amazed that he just wants to forget about it. But as I said, I did get an email from Mark Vaughan, and he said that my account is basically correct. He was happy with that. I don't know when the story about his involvement with Aleister Crowley originated, but that again is a blight on what, blight on his life. You know, they were, by all accounts, very decent people. And it's really sad that this story has latched onto them.
There you go, another nice cup of Rosy Lee.
Thank you very much. Very kind.
I've got something.
Oh,
for you to have a look at.
Okay.
It's a family snap, and I mean, just have a look at this photograph and tell me what you can see.
It's a group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, different ages, standing in what looks like a window or a doorway, probably a doorway. They look like a nice group of, like a nice family, Probably quite well-to-do, but not immensely wealthy, but comfortably off.
Well, the boys in the picture, those 4 are all Gerald Vaughan's sons.
No way.
Their mother, Pip, is at the back of the photo there.
That's their mother, Pip.
In the photo. And, I do wonder how they must feel about how their dad's story has been rewritten for this myth, this story of the cottage.
Yeah. Appalled, I would think. Yeah.
I mean, it's not
appalled.
as though they were themselves seeking any kind of
No.
media interest or celebrity status.
No.
I kind of just wonder, if a member of your family had that story associated with them, how you'd end up feeling.
Well, you'd feel it was being possible to own your own past, wouldn't you? Your own ancestry, somehow or other. That there's a story out there that's so strong and so powerful that whatever you say, you can't do anything about it.
There's another photo I want to show you.
Okay.
Tell me what you can see.
Okay, this is a photograph. It's a very old photograph. It's on a beach. In the background, there's a dog, kind of like a Whippet Labrador cross, and in front of the dog, there's an elderly man in some swimming trunks, big old-fashioned swimming trunks, sitting on a rock, and he's holding a child who's sitting on a higher rock next to him. A boy. It's lovely.
What do you think the relationship between the two?
Could be like a grandfather and a grandson posing for the camera. Kind of proud granddad and smiling grandson. Close. They look like they're very close.
The old man,
Uh-huh.
that's Aleister Crowley.
What? No way. There's no way that's Aleister Crowley.
And,
Oh, my God.
and the boy is his son.
Where's the great beast?
And they're on a beach in Cornwall.
Wow.
So the boy's mother was Patricia Doherty. She was from Newlyn.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure Crowley wasn't your typical family man, but there he is, holiday snap.
In that photograph, he looks like very much a typical family man.
Just off maybe to make some sandcastles.
Yeah, not
that beach.
Nothing like the image that he presented of himself to the world.
Now, the son that's in the photograph there.
Yeah.
What if I were to tell you that I found someone who knew him?
Wow. Oh my God, what, in Cornwall?
It's a place called Morver. Do you know where that is?
Yeah, I know Morver. It's not far from Penzance. It's not far from all of the areas we're looking at, really. It's just across the moor from the cottage.
Well, how about we take a trip down there then?
Fantastic. Right, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make some tea, put it in a flask, and sandwiches?
We have to make our way southeast along the coast. We'll have to go beyond Zena and follow a route full of dramatic rocky headlands. But before we get there, Graham announces a tea break.
Rest it there. Can you just say something for me, Owen?
Episode 2 of Stakeout.
Right, okay. So we're
here now in Penzance.
Do you know what, Graham? I really appreciate the fact you've made me some sandwiches for my lunch.
Yeah.
This is just thoughtful, and I'm going to get used to this because I'm.
Oh no, me too.
And in films, when you see people eating and having a conversation, it always seems to be just completely intelligible. You don't kind of.
No.
People having a conversation like this. I'm assuming in TV drama when they say, "Oh, you're going to have this conversation with so and so over lunch." Does the director say, look, make sure when you talk you've actually chewed your food and swallowed it?
There's TV eating, isn't there? Some actors do I am eating acting. You know what I mean?
What do you mean?
Sometimes you see actors eating on screen and you think, but you don't really eat like that.
What, because they're eating effetely or
Yeah,
something?
I bet you really normally chow right down. You know, chomp on it, making a huge noise.
But if you write a scene where two people are eating, or in some hospitality environment, do you kind of write that into the script, or is it only the words you're interested in? But you don't
Unless it's relevant to the plot.
Right. You don't go to the level of the fact that you want to make one character appear to have a certain impression on the audience. So, for example, as my father used to describe it, not sure if you're familiar with this word, smallock.
Smallock, no.
And smallocking, he would define smallocking as...
Yeah. My dad was a champion smallocker.
Yeah, that's one of the things
It's
that
not-
interests me when you have to translate something which is perfectly normal into, say, a piece of television.
Yeah.
Do you have to take it apart and put it back together again, or do you find some way of making it appear natural when in fact it's not? Because you are distilling what you want to do in that scene. You're obviously giving a television version of what is some two people chatting and sitting in a car having a sandwich on a stakeout, but you want to translate that into something which looks like convincing television.
Well, from a scriptwriter's point of view, you go interior, exterior car, country lane, which is where we are now.
Yeah.
Ian sits in the passenger seat wearing headphones and dark glasses, trying to appear inconspicuous.
Yeah,
Graham,
I know, but we are on a
Graham.
stakeout. I don't want to be recognised.
Graham, playing mum, sits in the driving seat with an open bag on his lap which contains sandwiches and a flask of tea. That would be it. You wouldn't then go, Ian nibbles. Well, you could do. Ian nibbles a Feetly on his ham sandwich.
So you were looking at me then when I was eating,
Exactly.
just started talking, and you're just taking it all in, and you're going to use it in a script.
Yeah.
Right.
And you could say, Graham, his mouth full of ham, speaks incoherently while scanning the surrounding environment.
Yeah.
You could say
Okay.
that.
So, well, I'd be interested to see this written up. So,
Exactly. You write this up.
yeah, we can. To get a sense of how it all works and how we might deploy it.
2:00.
Time to rock and roll.
At Morva, by the sea, we draw deep breaths. We keep our eyes wide berthed to check the sea's delinquency, its randomness. There are no cast-off islands here, no belted reefs to mute the hammer blows of the sea's brute force, its high-handedness. The sea destroys itself at Morva, offloads spume and salt on the frantic wind, while clouds like Amalia muster on the rim of the Atlantic's taut horizon. This is a berth to brace against a storm, when Cornwall dips and slides beneath the blows of the earth shakers, and rocks root down to the Widowmaker.
I'm Ian. This is Graham. Come in.
We've come to see Des Hannigan, a man with the strong, sinewy frame of a climber, albeit an elderly one. He came here from Scotland in the 1960s and never left. Since then, he's been a successful journalist, travel writer, photographer, and, as you might have noticed, a poet. He's going to tell us how he came to meet Aleister Crowley's son, who was at the time also known as Aleister. Des was working in Newlyn, near a house called Wheel Betsy, that had been built for the artists Caroline Burland Yates and Thomas Cooper Gotch.
I was working at the top of Newlyn Hill on this estate of bungalows.
Yep.
And Aleister lived at Wheel Betsy, which was his grandfather's house. Thomas Gotch, the painter, had built Wheel Betsy. So he was living there at the time with his mother and his half-sisters, I think. And the estate was pretty ramshackle, or the organisation was. And they decided to pack up for the winter, but they needed someone there to look after it. So I was working there with a friend of mine, Russ Hedges, who was a painter, because we were, this was before I went fishing. This was way back, just before that. So we were kind of looking for work everywhere.
Yeah.
So we used to do a bit of labouring and so on. So we were working there. Aleister was working there, so the people who were organising the site all cleared off and said, well, we need someone to look after it. Aleister was the most steadiest one, they thought. So Aleister, yes, he was quite a serious man. So Aleister and Russ and myself spent the winter months sort of tidying up, digging ditches and so on, trying to put to right various things that had gone wrong the basic way. So that's how I knew Aleister, and he was lovely, really. He was very, I wouldn't say he wasn't a simple man, but in the best possible way. He was an uncomplicated man, but deeply eccentric too.
How does that go together?
It was a strange one, really. He was, I suppose, again, the word naive is not the word I would use. He was just very open, but he had peculiarities in a way. He dressed always, and jodhpurs were a big thing with him, and a riding crop. And troubled. He was troubled all his life.
Was he?
Yeah.
What by, do you think?
People might say, oh, it's because of his father and all this nonsense around, but I don't think so. I think it was just, possibly he'd been a bit pillar to post in his life too.
Right.
I mean, the thing, I always have that caveat, I didn't know much about his background, so I knew him simply as a person. And working, as we were working, this was hands-on, rough labouring work, which is a great It's a great kind of levelling thing.
It is. Did he ever talk about his father at all?
Not at all. And
Never.
we did not broach that.
No, but you knew who his
We
father
knew,
was.
of course.
But, yeah.
But-
But he never dined out on it.
Not at all.
No.
Not at all. Never mentioned him at any time.
Did you know his mum?
I met her, yes, Deirdre.
Deirdre.
I didn't know her particularly. And Deirdre was massively eccentric, really.
Was she?
Yes. I mean, she was. And the only couple of times I met Deirdre, she was always seemed to be glowering a bit frowning. You know?
Was she?
A bit intense. But I didn't meet her enough to actually...
And eccentric in what way?
Well, the house was
Was it?
quite fascinating, yeah. I think there was a time when she adopted or she fostered a lot of children.
Did she?
There were times when there would be a bit of a uproar from the house because it was right next to where we were working on this infamous pink estate. And we would hear this, and Aleister would start to look slightly embarrassed by this. He wouldn't say anything. So we'd be working away, and Russ and I would be sort of like, oh, they're at it again, they're shrieking and shouting, and all the girls and the mother and shouting. And Aleister would suddenly go, oh, excuse me, and he'd go off in the corner. And we used to time it and say, any minute now, there would be a cut-off of the noise. The minute Aleister had arrived, absolute silence, finished. And then he'd come walking back again, and he'd say, sorry about that. It was wonderful. This is what I'm saying. He was a lovable man, really.
Yeah.
You know, I'm very fond of him.
Well, it sounds like his mother was too.
Yes, she was.
The thing that struck me when you were talking to Des is that these are real stories, and we've been hearing from real people about what happened. And in a way, for me, they're much more interesting than the myths. But it's the myth that seems to persist. I mean, why do you think that is?
Whoa, that's the kind of at the heart of everything, isn't it? Why does the myth persist when the real story doesn't? In Cornwall, everything seems to me to be about myth and legend and story. It's about the past. The past is almost as present as the present in Cornwall. I don't know if I'm over-romanticising that, but that's often what it feels like. People celebrate the past and they celebrate their myths. They celebrate the seasons. It's not just landscape. It's weather and seasons and everything is so changeable and so alive here that I think that contributes to the reality of events, if you like, becoming myth and the truth being lost to the myth.
The other thing about hearing from Des was this relationship that Crowley had with his son, and I've got a confession to make.
Oh, yeah?
I've been down the library again. And I found, I took a copy of this. It's a letter from Aleister Crowley to his 10-year-old son, which he must have written just before he died.
Oh, God. Oh, amazing.
And it starts off, "My dear son, this is the first letter that your father has ever written to you, so you can imagine that it will be very important.
And you should keep it and lay it by your heart. First of all, let me tell you how intensely happy your reappearance has made me. I feel that I must devote a great deal of my time to watching over your career. One of the wisest men of olden time gave this instruction to his pupils: know thyself. And learning Latin helps you to do this, and I regard this as very important indeed. There are a great many people going about today who tell you that Latin is no use to you in the ordinary affairs of life. And that's quite true if you're going to be some commonplace person like a tradesman or a bank clerk. But you are a gentleman. And if you want to be an educated gentleman, you must know Latin. There's one more point that I want to impress to you. The best models of English writings are Shakespeare and the Old Testament, especially the book of Job, the Psalms and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. It will be a very good thing for you to commit as much as you can both of these books and of the best plays of Shakespeare to memory, so that they form the foundation of your style. Love is the law, love under will. Your affectionate father.
You know, there is someone in this investigation of ours that we've let get away. We haven't got anywhere close to him. I mean, the closest we've got to him is that letter to his son. And he's just kept completely out of the spotlight. I mean, you know, the ghost hunters call the cottage Crowley's Cottage. That's the only person they go there to contact. And he is somehow out there in the landscape. And we just haven't noticed.
No, we haven't noticed, have we? Our eyes and focus have been on other things, but actually what's been conjured out of this landscape is a sense of who someone is, of who that man is, that may have some vestige of truth in it, but the real person inside the invention, you know, both the self-invention and the way other people have invented him. Who is that real person?
So, there it is. This curious question of how a man who courted so much publicity could spend time at the cottage in Cornwall, but apparently leave no trace of ever having been there. How has he become so closely associated with the cottage? And why are there so many stories about him in this part of Cornwall? If you have any theories or thoughts on this, please do let me and Graham know. You can find us on social media with the handle One Dark Podcast. It would be great to hear from you. Next time, we finally close in on Aleister Crowley, and we experience something that many of the ghost hunters can only dream of. We hear his voice talking to us. Do join us for the next episode.